I would like to introduce the next speaker, who's the Executive Director of Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition, which works to end discrimination on the basis of gender identity and gender expression. The former educator and organizer of the One Gender, and member programs, the network, the head, that's French. The name of the speaker is Ghana Scott. He is a nationally recognized leader on LGBT health issues. Wow, that's great.
Thank you, Jane Doe, for asking me to be here. As the speaker has said, I am Executive Director of the Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition. I am also a transgender man. For the first half of my life, I lived as a woman, and I was the target of men's violence through harassment, intimidation, domestic violence, and the demeaning of my feminine gender expression. Inside, I knew I was not female, but I struggled with identifying as a man, as masculine. Because for me, masculinity was so wrapped up in the patriarchy. Often to express masculinity in this culture and in this society, it means to dominate over women, to demean femininity. And this was not the kind of man I wanted to be. But where were my role models of what it means to be masculine and value femininity? To use compassion to show strength, not violence or force. You might be asking yourself, how is violence against transgender people related to violence against women? Violence against transgender people represents a form of gender terrorism, whose underlying motivation is to maintain a social system in which men dominate women through the use of emotional, verbal, and physical acts of force, in which the line between genders must be rigidly maintained in order to support the social structure of a world that privileges masculinity over femininity. In fact, anti-transgender violence is a form of violence against women because this violence targets gender, whether that transgender person is a transgender woman or a transgender man. For someone who is female to male like myself, the message I get from this violence is, I will never be a real man. And for male to female transgender women, it means that they will never be real women. Trans people are past, present, and future women. That's how I view us. Every year on November 20th, the transgender community and our allies come together to mourn transgender victims of hate crimes. Last year, 143 transgender people were murdered. On average, 11 transgender people are murdered per month in this world. The majority of these victims are transgender women of color. They are murdered simply because they're transgender, because they're expressing their femininity, and they're daring to be themselves and being truthful to their internal sense of their gender as female. These murders are brutal. Of the few murders that have been investigated and a perpetrator is identified, the murderer is often, if not always, male. The message that is being sent by this hate violence is one of eradication and annihilation. There is a secondary message being sent to the community, which is that transgender people are less than and we should not exist. Here in Massachusetts, there was a case of Chanel Pickett. November of 1995, Chanel Pickett, an African-American trans woman, was strangled to death at the age of 23. At her service, Chanel's twin sister Gabrielle remembered her as a vibrant person full of life, high-spirited, with many goals. Unfortunately, Chanel became the prime target of a man named William Palmer, with a predatory attitude towards transgender women. Palmer frequented bars where transgender women hung out and socialized. Chanel thought Palmer was asking her out, and he had indicated he wanted to be her boyfriend. Instead, he took her back to his apartment and strangled her to death after beating her so bad that her face was not recognizable. Despite strong physical evidence against Palmer, he was convicted only of assault and battery and received 2 years of jail time. a longer sentence than the prosecutor at the time had requested, and the judge acknowledged that this was a particularly vicious nature of killing. Unfortunately, this scenario is all too common, with similar incidents occurring around the country. In Newark, California, a 17-year-old named Gwen Araujo was killed by 4 men who beat her and strangled her to death, when they discovered she was a transsexual. In Greeley, Colorado, an 18-year-old, Angie Zapata, was beaten by Alan Andrade, first with his fist and then a fire extinguisher, until she was dead. In the arrest affidavit, Andrade said that he had killed it. Andrade was found guilty of first-degree murder and a hate crime, as well as aggravated motor vehicle theft and identity theft. And in Humboldt, Nebraska, 22-year-old Brandon Tina, a transgender man, was raped by 2 men he had been friends with after he was outed by police. Brandon reported the rape to the police department, but they lost the evidence. The men were not charged, but they learned about the report and a week later went back and killed him and 2 others. The convictions are often rare in murder cases of transgender people because they often go under-investigated. We need to take a stand against violence against women, and this type of violence is a human rights violation. These abuses around the world are obstacles in efforts for peace and gender equality. But we must also include transgender people. Violence against any gender expression or gender identity must not be tolerated. I ask you to speak up about violence against transgender youth and adults, transgender men and transgender women, and I ask you to support transgender civil rights bill like the one here in Massachusetts. Today I'm standing in a room with male role models, showing what positive masculinity can be. Positive masculinity is speaking out against violence against women. It's standing up to homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. It's valuing all gender identities and gender expressions and using compassion to show strength. Thank you.